Welcome to Compliance Monitoring. My name is Edward Williams, and today I will provide you with a brief overview of compliance monitoring. Our purpose for compliance monitoring: we want to gather evidence from LEAs to assess the effectiveness of their activities. We want to understand the implementation and needs of programs to better support LEAs. We want to share good practices observed at LEAs, not only at the state level, but with other LEAs as well, and ensure compliance with federal regulations. These are the programs that will be monitored with our compliance monitoring process. So you see we have everything from Title I Part A to Title II Part A to Title V Part B, all the way to McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. Also with our COVID relief programs, so ESSA-1, ESSA-2, ARP-ESSA, and Gear 1. And for my LEAs who were monitored for ESSA-1 and Gear 1 during the 2021-2022 pilot year, they will only be monitored for ESSA-2 and ARP-ESSA. Risk assessment. The ALSDE created a risk assessment that uses some of the following indicators listed below. To name a few, we have Title I budget allocation. We have LEAs with new federal funds and grants. We have changes in key personnel like your superintendent, CSFO, federal programs coordinator. Also, too, we have findings from the last compliance monitoring review. These are just some of the few indicators that we use at the ALSDE to risk LEAs. Based on our risk assessment, we tier LEAs into three tiers. Tier 1, which is our low risk, Tier 2, which is our moderate risk, and Tier 3, which is our high risk. Now, based on your risk level will determine the type of monitoring that you will receive. For all my low risk LEAs, the type of monitoring will be a documentation review. For all my moderate risk LEAs, the type of monitoring will be a desk review. And for my high risk LEAs, the type of monitoring will be an on-site visit. With our compliance monitoring tier process, you get a chance to see the different types of review that happens at each level. So if you're tier 1 low risk, of course you will have the documentation review, you will have no interviews, and the documentation requested sample size will be small. If you're tier 2 moderate risk, you will have the documentation review, you will have the virtual interviews, so maybe your CSI, TSR, Title I Serve Schools, the Title I parent interview, the central office interview, and neglected or delinquent facilities if applicable. And that documentation sample size will be moderate. For my Tier 3 high-risk LEAs, you will go through the documentation review. You will have in-person interviews. So Title I served schools, non-Title I served schools, non-public schools, the Title I parent interview, the central office interview, and neglected or delinquent facilities interview. And that documentation sample size will be large. Monitoring documentation requests. So here you get a chance to see from a timeline standpoint what's expected from the LEAs and when the ALSDE sends out information. So at 5 weeks out, the initial email goes out to the LEA. At 3 weeks out, all LEA documentation is due into Cognia. At 2 weeks out, the ALSDE sends an email to the LEA with the following information: inventory selection, expenditure selection, and interview selection. And 0 weeks out, documentation is due that Monday at 8 a.m. Right, and you also get an example of sample city schools, right, with that information. Here you get a chance to see the different types of documentation, the time frame of your monitoring, what type of documentation you will provide as far as year. So for example, if I'm looking at fiscal documentation and my monitoring falls between August 24th and December 24th, I will provide fiscal year 2024. If my monitoring falls between January 2025 and May 2025, I will provide fiscal year 2025. From a programmatic standpoint, I will provide school year 2024-2025 for August 2024 through May 2025. Right? So from a programmatic standpoint, I'm providing the same documentation no matter when my monitoring date is. The only thing that changes is the fiscal documentation. And below, you see an example with our sample schools. Right? So monitoring date November 4th, that fiscal year will be 2024. And also to monitoring date with 317, that fiscal date will be 2025. Here we get a chance to look inside the monitoring document and look at some of the components that's listed inside and how we should kind of navigate the document. With our quick guide outlined by monitoring tasks, here you get a chance to see the different types of things that's listed on the monitoring document. So first we have the title, so it will be Title 1, Part A. Next you will have the section of this programmatic or fiscal requirements. Then you will get into the components. So one, title of component, then the description of component. We see with one, that is white, so we know that we need to provide documentation in Cognia for that particular component. Two, you see that it's gray, right? So anytime those components are gray, we know that we do not provide documentation into Cognia. The ALSDE will look in the EGAP, wherever we need to look to find that particular documentation for that component. The technical assistance checklist. Now, these are the checklists that we use at the ALSDE for assessment purposes, right? So if you follow these checklists, you will have no problem making sure that you are in compliance for each component. So let's take a look at this checklist. Technical assistance checklist number 3, common compliance section 3, required documents. So component 3.1, property management policies and procedures. Now with this, we know we need LEA property management procedures. Now inside those procedures, I need the following subtopics. I need LEA disposal procedures, which include lost, stolen, obsolete, or damaged items. I need LEA prior approval procedures, spreadsheet management procedures, right? Safeguarding, authorized use, inventory management, technology use procedures, maintenance procedures, annual inventory procedures, and also procedures to ensure fees are not charged. All right, so in 3.1, if I have all of those subtopics in my accounting, my property management manual, then I am good to go with 3.1. Component 3.2 and 3.3 is evidence of property management compliance and inventory records. Now with this one, it's multiple things that are required. First, I need to make sure I have inventory records that show a physical inventory has been conducted within the past 12 months. Right, so every year I need to make sure that I'm doing a physical inventory and I need to provide documentation for that. All right, so the next thing is I need the inventory spreadsheet, and I need that spreadsheet to have the following columns, right? It should have the description of item, a serial number or other identification number, the funding source, the title holder, acquisition date, costs including federal contribution in the cost, location, use and condition, and disposal data. Right, so if I have all of those things inside of my inventory spreadsheet is good to go. Required form template style 1. Right, now required form 1, this is the data form. And with this, we have the continuation of compensation during COVID closures. Right, the gross employee salary report. With this, I have to provide the FTE data for each one of those years listed and attach any supporting documentation to this form, right? So for whatever year I have any drops in FTE from one year to the next, I have to provide supporting documentation to show for those drops in FTEs. Required form template style 2. In required form 2, this is the required narrative form. So with this, I just need to provide as much narrative as possible to effectively answer recruitment, hiring, and retaining effective teachers. Required form, template style 3. With this form, this is the teacher fluency and paraprofessional supervision assurance. With this, I need to make sure that the superintendent prints their name, the superintendent signs their name, and also to the date. With our compliance monitoring walkthrough, technical systems checklist number 15, title 3, part A, we get a chance to look at component 1.1, which is our comprehensive English learning plan. And with this component, there is no documentation that should be submitted into Cognia. Component 1.2, which is our English fluency of teachers and paraprofessional supervision, requires the ALSDE required form number 3, which includes the superintendent's signature. Component 3.1, property management policies and procedures. With this, I know I need my property management procedures. Within those property management procedures, I need to make sure I have disposal procedures. I need to have spreadsheet management procedures, all the way to maintenance procedures to ensure fees are not charged. Right, so as long as I have each one of those subtopics in my property management procedures, I should be good for 3.1. Component 1.4, the least restrictive environment. With this, I know I need that provide that English learner least restrictive environment evidence. Right? And some examples could be completed IELPs, teacher and student schedules. I get a chance to see the evidence from a tier standpoint. So if I'm a tier 1 low risk LEA, no additional documentation is needed. Right? The procedures will be checked in Title 3, Part A, Component 1.1. If I'm that tier 2 moderate risk LEA, I need one sample from 2 schools selected by the LEA. If I'm a tier 3 high risk LEA, I need one sample from 4 schools selected by the LEA. Now, if the LEA has fewer schools than the requirement, the documentation for all the schools within the LEA should be provided. So if a high risk LEA only has 3 schools, they need to provide the documentation for all 3 schools. The ALSDE will also review the AIMS portal to check to ensure English learners have access to special education, gifted education, advanced placement, and career tech programs. For any compliance monitoring support, don't hesitate to reach out. My email is listed below, edward.williams@alsd.edu. You can also reach out to Jason Isaacs, who is the Compliance Monitoring Education Administrator.